When Republicans took control of the House this past January, they passed all their new rules about how Congress was going to run. One of the new rules was that they would take a full week off for every 2 weeks they worked. Sweet. Tons of time home in the district, which for a member of Congress must be awesome. Unless, of course, the last thing you did before heading home to your district for your spring recess was voting to end Medicare, voting for the Paul Ryan budget plan, a budget which is making for lots of very uncomfortable encounters between Republican members of Congress and their now very angry constituents. Paul Ryan himself, who represents a district in Wisconsin, you'll recall him getting booed by his constituents last week when he tried to defend the parts of his plan that call for really big tax cuts for the rich and an end to Medicare. Well, today, Congressman Ryan held yet more town hall events in Wisconsin. We got a heads up from one of our Wisconsin viewers that some of the Paul Ryan events this week were being moved to larger venues in order to accommodate the number of people who wanted to go tell Paul Ryan what they thought of him and his plan. When we found out that one of those overpacked Paul Ryan town halls was happening today in Kenosha, I asked our producer, Mike Yarvitz, who was watching the tape from that event, I asked Mike if there was any way to tell from the tape what the balance of the crowd was, whether it was a lot of people turning out because they supported Paul Ryan or whether it was a lot of people turning out because they were not supporting Paul Ryan. And Mike just turned to me after he saw the tape and said, do you just want to listen to the questions that Paul Ryan got asked once the mic was opened? Yes, Mike. Yes, I do.
You want to take a publicly administered program such as Medicare and turn it over to a private corporation. Well, tell me how my grandma's going to benefit from that.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question.
You're asking the elderly to take on the insurance companies when we can't take on the insurance companies.
Right. So,
do you know anything about Medicare?
Well, I'm not on it, no.
That's what I'm driving at.
When I look at your budget, I see you cutting the things that I agree with, entitlement programs, but I don't see you doing across-the-board cuts with the military.
It's not that hard to find savings and cut programs on the backs of the poor, of the underprivileged, of those without lobbyist groups, and those without clout. I read this piece of document, and I saw nothing that really speaks to helping those who are already not able to make ends meet.
Do not renew the Bush tax credit for the wealthy. Tax corporations and overseas profits and bring the jobs home.
Okay.
Place a windfall tax on oil companies and rescind the $4 billion subsidy. I'll debate these points anytime with you. Just call me. My number is 262.
What was the last 97 what?
Welcome home, Congressman Ryan. In terms of the size of the crowd at that event today, Politico.com reported that, quote, at least 200 people were left outside once the 300-seat auditorium filled to capacity. Mr. Ryan himself said the crowds were larger than those during the infamous August 2009 healthcare town halls about health reform, larger than 2009. In the Paul Ryan case, you could hear that earnest Wisconsin crowd, could not have been more civil, even as they were being so very highly critical of him. But if you've been thinking that this might finally become a national story, these Republicans getting yelled at by their constituents, it might finally become a national story only if the town halls become rollicking, only if they become rollicking shout fests where people are visibly mad, that threshold, too, has been crossed in Florida today. This is freshman Republican Dan Webster of Florida having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day with his constituents today in Orlando.
Not one senior citizen is harmed by this budget.
What?
You're a liar!
Everyone under 55 is What insurance company is going to insure me? You tell me.
None.
He wants to repeal the pre-existing. Wait a minute, let me answer. What insurance company is going to...
I promise you, not only will Medicare not go broke, which it will under the current system.
I won't have it. What does it matter?
You understand it. Medicare's going to go broke. We are offering...
Who cares? I won't have it.
You will have it if this plan's adopted. You will.
Congressman, why did you vote for a budget to privatize Medicare, cut VA benefits, and turn around and gave away in tax cuts, not just to corporations, to the highest personal rates? And that's the reason you don't worry, you're not caring about the deficit, and you wouldn't have gave away all those tax cuts. Because it's country. We can't afford it.
unemployment. So with these stupid policies of 12 years have done nothing for the people in Florida, why would you go for the Ryan budget that will put that same policy in the other 49 states?
Welcome home, Congressman Webster. As we talked about on last night's show, this sort of thing is engendering a bit of a Republican freakout right now. House Republicans held a conference call today privately to try to help their members have better messaging about how to discuss their vote for the Paul Ryan Republican budget with their constituents. But beyond the Republican Party itself, the corporate-funded big money part of the conservative movement is not freaked out about the kind of thing you just saw. They don't get freaked out. They, rather, are mounting a counteroffensive, a big, expensive counteroffensive to try to quash the story of this grassroots anger that you just saw expressed against Republicans who voted for the Paul Ryan Republican budget. We're actually going to have a special report on that counteroffensive on tomorrow night's show. We've already started working on it. I've seen some of our preliminary findings on it. It is mind-bending. When the right freaks out now, the right spends lots and lots and lots and lots and unimaginably lots of money in order to get their way. Joining us right now is Eugene Robinson, MSNBC political analyst and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post. Gene, thanks very much for being here.
It's great to be here, Rachel.
The Republicans decided to hold their vote for the Paul Ryan budget right before they went back home to their districts. Did they think they would be greeted with a standing ovation, or did they know it would be more like this?
Maybe they envisioned rose petals being strewn in their path and laurel wreaths being placed tenderly on their heads. But you know, that was never going to be the reality. This, what Paul Ryan's budget proposes to do to Medicare is wildly unpopular in the country, and every poll bears that out. And we had a poll last week. New York Times had a poll last week. I think in our poll, 78%. Don't cut Medicare spending, so this was never going to be a love fest. If they thought it was, they were wrong.
It has been interesting to see how this story has picked up momentum as a story every day over the last 5 days or so. On Friday night, I had a sort of unhinged rant about how nobody was covering this because people only like to cover angry conservatives. They don't like to cover liberals. But I was proven wrong. Over the weekend, there was a ton of national stories, a bunch of Beltway stories, and I feel like D.C. and the national media is sort of waking up to the fact that Paul Ryan's budget plan could be a big monumental liability, even though the Beltway press praised it for so long as this wonderful, courageous, bold thing. Does that change, ultimately, the politics of the Republican budget?
I think it substantially changes the politics of the Republican budget. It certainly makes Washington understand the politics of the Republican budget a lot better. I mean, this sentiment was always out there, and in a sense, making Medicare a voucher program, I think, was always a non-starter. It just was never. That's not going to be popular. You're going to have to find a different kind of fix. You know, I don't know that it's time to start talking about the Vermont route that you were talking about earlier. But it's got to be something to hold down medical costs as opposed to something to throw the seniors to the wolves, which is the way people correctly perceive the Paul Ryan plan.
There does remain this question, even as we're seeing, I feel like we're sort of seeing blossom the politics around here. It's another case where the Democratic Party is being led by its own base. All right, we saw that a little bit in Wisconsin in some of these statewide fights where people had a legitimately organic grassroots response to something, and then the party scrambled to catch up afterwards. Can the Democratic Party sort of follow this organic, unorganized grassroots anger at the Republicans into some sort of electoral benefit?
It certainly should. The Democratic Party has been behind the base, I would argue, all along, and hasn't been listening to the base. And here's something else the base is saying. You know what? The economy, Wall Street thinks it's getting better, but we don't. People are more pessimistic about the economy right now than they have been in 2 years, according to a New York Times poll last week. And it's about jobs. It's about the continuing epidemic of foreclosures. It's about about the depression in housing prices. It's about people trying to wonder how their family's going to get to the end of the month. Those are the issues that Democrats ought to be talking about and hitting home on. I think whoever does find an intelligent and effective way of talking about those issues is going to do really well in 2012.
Did you hear an effective start of that message in President Obama's deficit speech and in some of the appearances that he has been doing since that deficit speech? Was that the start of that discussion?
Maybe sort of, kind of, I think. It wasn't full-throated. It wasn't necessarily full-blooded. But I do see some signs that the White House kind of gets it. The White House gets the political implications of the Ryan plan. The White House gets that people really want to hear about jobs and the economy. And you know, deficit reduction is something, yes, we have to think about, but we don't have to do something draconian right now. I think they get that. I think the rest of the Democratic Party may take a while to catch up, but gee, what if they did?
Eugene Robinson, MSNBC political analyst and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post. If they did, you and I would probably come up with some sort of really stupid prop-based skit to celebrate on set, and I'd convince you to come here to do it, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I'm there.
Yes. Thanks, Gene. It's great to see you. Thanks.
Okay, Rachel.
All right, we've got a piece of tape to play tonight, coming up at the end of the show, that involves something about a rabbit and an old man. Comes from Saturday Night Live. I had to beg our executive producer, Bill Wolf, to let me play this piece of tape on the air because he was disinclined to do so once he had seen it. He was disinclined to let me play it for what you will see are obvious reasons. But I think that I was right. I think it's important. I think it helps make a point. I hope my mom doesn't get mad. And in any case, it's coming up.